Individuals and communities can make a difference. We can look back and be proud or ashamed. On behalf of area Jewry, we commemorate Southbury, the first place in the world where the Third Reich was defeated. They called themselves an organization of patriotic Americans of German stock. The Bund was, in fact, thoroughly Nazi. Its slogan, Free America, meant a Jew-free America. The Bund had been renamed from Friends of New Germany. It revered Adolf Hitler. Its internal organization was fascist, its leadership appointed by Nazi Germany. During the 1930s, its membership rose to 25,000 dues-paying members. The Bund was run by Fritz Julius Kuhn. Kuhn developed 17 camps for inculcating the Bund's message of hate. For paramilitary training, viewing Nazi-style parades, attending political rallies, and teaching German-American youngsters of the greatness of Adolf Hitler and the necessity of carrying on his work in the United States. Two of the camps were near New York City, yet the Bundists were not the only anti-Semites at that time. Prejudice was common, quotas and gentlemen's agreements. Prominent anti-Semites included Henry Ford and Father Coughlin. Charles Lindbergh was a Nazi apologist. Jews and other targets of hatred did not always have defenders. Reacting to the question of an Olympic boycott due to the exclusion of Jewish athletes, Brigadier General Charles H. Sherrill, a U.S. member of the International Olympic Committee, threatened, quote, "If the Jewish minority of 5 million in the United States continue to stir up the rest of the 120 million Americans, there is a serious danger of an anti-Semitic wave in our country," unquote. In 1937, the German-American Bund came to Southbury, a small town of 1,200 residents. Acting surreptitiously on their behalf, Wolfgang Jung of Stamford purchased 178 acres in the Kettletown section. Word spread. And the clergy responded. The Reverend M.E.N. Lindsay of South Britain Congregational Church called the Bund an insidious menace, unchristian, un-American, and pro-Nazi. He continued, "Is the Nazi movement the Antichrist? The very practice of the Nazi government in the persecution of the Jews alone condemns it at this point." The Reverend Felix Manley of Southbury Federated Church warned, quote, "This camp is obviously planned as a training station for young Hitler youth who will stretch their arms and Heil Hitler, with all that that implies." Other Southburyans agreed. George Holmes, a World War I veteran who owned a gas station in town, spoke up against the Bund before veterans groups. He then founded Unite Americans against the German-American Bund. A meeting was scheduled at Old Town Hall, but the space was too small for the crowd, one of the largest Southbury had ever seen. So the event was moved across the street to the South Britain Congregational Church. A town meeting was quickly followed by a protest meeting. Intentionally, the selectmen did not attend. Reverend Manley was elected chair of the meeting. George Holmes and Jenny Hinman introduced anti-Bund resolutions. They passed unanimously. George Holmes said, "History may be in the making in this little church today, and it rests with us as to whether that history shall have an honored place in the annals of our country or be remembered as only an empty gesture." At Jenny Hinman's request, the meeting concluded with an emotional singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. The gathering made national headlines. We remember these people who stood for Southbury. A zoning board was chosen comprised of prominent anti-Bundists. Officially, First Selectman J. Edward Corr denied that the zoning move had, quote, any connection whatsoever, unquote, with the opposition to the camp. He told the press, Southbury merely wanted what was already the case in Roxbury and New Milford. He added, quote, like many other towns, there has been increased building activity. There are too many gas stations. Chicken coops have been built in the center of the town, near the main highways, and we feel that zoning regulations are urgently needed before conditions are any worse, unquote. In the meantime, Bund members began clearing land at the 178-acre property of the new Camp van Steuben in Southbury. They were met on a Sunday 2 weeks later by a posse of Southbury constables. The portly but affable Constable John King, a real estate dealer here, walked up and declared openly, quote, you're all under arrest. The Buddhists were incredulous. Quote, in other towns where our camps are located, business is booming, and real estate values have increased as much as 300%. Don't you folks realize what a blessing the camp will be to you? Unquote. The Bundists told them, you have been led by Jewish propaganda. The Bundists were charged with violating existing blue laws by working on a Sunday. They were brought to the home of Justice of the Peace, Harold Hickok, to be arraigned. Hickok himself had been working on a car in his garage. After paying $150, the men were released on bond. The charges didn't stick, and with good reason. They were unconstitutional. The incident, however, underscored an important message. It was reinforced by Southbury's new zoning board and its regulations. Military training was prohibited. The Kettletown section was for residences and farms only. Uncontested by the Bund, these zoning regulations effectively eliminated Camp van Steuben. The Bund sold the property. Soon life in Southbury returned to its normal rhythms. The townspeople had met this challenge, and this story became a faded memory. For a while longer, the Bund would menace America. It reached its zenith in 1939 at a rally at Madison Square Garden. Hitler was compared to George Washington and thanked for, quote, freeing the Reich of its fetters, unquote. But the Bund's fall would be precipitous. Later in 1939, Fritz Kuhn was convicted of embezzlement for lavishing Bund funds on one of his girlfriends, a former Miss America. Bund leaders were interred during World War II. Kuhn was deported to Germany after the war. In contrast, Southbury has grown and prospered. And note well, Southbury's confronting and overcoming Nazism happened in 1937. Before the Kristallnacht pogrom, before appeasement at Munich, before Hitler invaded Poland to start World War II, before the bombing of London, before America's entry into World War II, and before the systematic murder of 6 million Jews during the Shoah. Back in the 1930s, no other community in America confronted the Bund as did Southbury. It wasn't the work of one person, but of many. Let us treasure this legacy from one generation to the next, and just as Southbury's activism began in its churches, we gather here tonight to commemorate the past and to reflect upon current threats, such as the ongoing genocide in Darfur. We know that we can make a difference, and by what we do, we define ourselves. We can look back and be proud or ashamed.